the power of detachment. There's a skill that will change your life more than any degree, any promotion, any relationship ever could. And nobody taught you how to do it. In fact, you've been actively programmed not to do it. You've been told that doing it makes you selfish, difficult, cold, that good women don't do this, that strong women push through instead. The skill? Knowing when to walk away and actually doing it. Not the messy, emotional, burn it all down kind of exit that you regret a week later. I'm talking about the calm, clear-eyed, self-preserving ability to look at a situation, a relationship, a job, a friendship, a version of yourself and say, this is no longer serving me, and then leave. Without guilt, without explanation, without looking back. Over the next hour and a half, you're going to learn exactly when to stay and when to go. You're going to learn why you've been staying in situations that are slowly destroying you, and you're going to learn how to become the woman who never has to walk away again, because she never lets things get that far in the first place. If you're tired of feeling stuck, if you're done making excuses for people who don't deserve them, if you're ready to choose yourself for once, keep listening. Your transformation starts right now. Chapter 1. Introduction. The woman who knows when to leave. You know what nobody tells you when you're growing up? That your ability to walk away is the most valuable skill you'll ever develop. Not your ability to stay and fight. Not your patience. Not your capacity to give endless chances. Your ability to leave. Because some of the most important moments in your life will be the ones where you had the courage to walk away. The relationship going nowhere, the job crushing your spirit, the friendship that turned toxic, the version of yourself that was playing small to keep others comfortable. Now let's be clear, this isn't about becoming cold. It's not about building walls or shutting everyone out. That's not power, that's fear dressed up as strength. This is about becoming selective, intentional about where you invest your energy, your time, your emotional bandwidth, and yes, your love. Here's what they don't tell you. Your capacity to care is not infinite. Research in psychology shows that humans have a limited amount of what's called ego depletion, the mental and emotional resources available for self-control and decision-making. Every time you tolerate disrespect, you're draining that resource. Every time you stay somewhere you shouldn't, you're making it harder to leave the next time. Think about the last time you stayed too long. Maybe it was a relationship where you knew bone deep something was wrong, but you stayed because you'd already invested so much time, because you thought you could fix it, because leaving felt like admitting defeat. Maybe it was a job where every Sunday night you felt that familiar dread settling into your stomach, where you'd sit in your car in the parking lot, giving yourself a pep talk just to walk through the door. But you stayed because the salary was decent, because your parents were proud, because everyone hates their job, right? Or maybe it was a friendship that had slowly curdled, where you were always the one reaching out, always the one remembering birthdays, always the one showing up during hard times. But they only called when they needed something. And you stayed because you'd known them since college, because you didn't want to seem petty, because that's just how they are. Whatever it was, I want you to remember that specific quality of discomfort, that low-grade chronic stress that became so familiar you almost stopped noticing it, that quiet resignation whispering, "This is just how it is." Now imagine a different version of that story, one where you recognized the signs earlier, where you trusted your instincts instead of talking yourself out of them, where you understood that walking away wasn't giving up, it was leveling up. That's what you're going to learn here. You're going to learn how to spot red flags you've been trained to ignore. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio talks about somatic markers, physical sensations your body uses to signal when something's wrong. That knot in your stomach, that's not anxiety, that's information. You're going to learn to trust it. You're going to learn how to communicate boundaries without needing permission or approval. Research from Brené Brown's work on shame and vulnerability shows that people who have strong boundaries are actually more compassionate, not less, because they're not operating from resentment. You're going to learn how to handle inevitable pushback when you start choosing yourself. Studies in social psychology reveal that when you change the dynamics of a relationship, the other person will try to restore the old pattern. They'll test your boundaries, they'll escalate. You're going to learn not to cave, and most importantly, you're going to learn how to walk away from anything not aligned with your highest good, even when it's hard, even when people are disappointed, even when you're scared. Because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Some of the most important moments in your life will be the ones where you had the courage to leave. The relationship that was going nowhere, the job killing your creativity, the friendship that became one-sided, the version of yourself playing small. Walking away is not about running from difficulty. It's not about avoiding hard conversations or ghosting people who challenge you. It's about having enough respect for yourself to recognize when you're pouring into a bottomless cup, when you're trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved, when you're fighting for a relationship where you're the only one fighting. The women who master this skill aren't the ones with the easiest lives. They're the ones who refuse to make their lives harder by staying where they're not valued. They understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and even the other person is to stop participating in dynamics that don't serve anyone. They've learned that your absence can be more powerful than your presence, that sometimes people don't appreciate what they have until they lose it, that you teach people how to treat you, not through your words, but through what you're willing to tolerate. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're worried that learning to walk away will make you hard, that setting boundaries will make you difficult, that choosing yourself will make you selfish. These fears keep women trapped in situations, slowly destroying them. These are lies that benefit everyone except you. Let me tell you what actually happens when you develop the power to walk away. You become more attractive, not less. There's nothing more magnetic than someone who knows their worth and isn't afraid to enforce it. Evolutionary psychology research shows that perceived scarcity increases value. When you demonstrate you can leave, you become more desirable. You become more trustworthy, not less. People know that when you choose to stay, it's because you genuinely want to be there, not because you're too afraid to leave. Your relationships improve, they don't deteriorate. The people meant for you will respect your boundaries. The people who aren't will filter themselves out, saving you years of wasted time. You become happier, lighter, more aligned with who you really are, because you're no longer carrying the weight of situations you should have left months or years ago. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. Walking away is a skill. And like any skill, it requires practice. You'll make mistakes. You'll leave things too early sometimes and too late others. You'll second-guess yourself. You'll face pressure from people who benefited from your inability to choose yourself. But every time you choose yourself, even when it's hard, you're building a muscle. You're rewiring neural pathways that told you to stay small. You're proving to yourself that you can survive without that person, that job, that situation you thought was irreplaceable. Neuroplasticity research shows that the brain is constantly rewiring itself based on your behaviors. Every time you enforce a boundary, you're literally changing your brain's structure. Every time you walk away from what doesn't serve you, you're making it easier to do it the next time. By the end of this audiobook, you won't just understand the power of walking away intellectually, you'll feel it in your bones. You'll have specific strategies and mindset shifts to start making different choices. You'll know how to recognize when it's time to go. You'll have language for setting boundaries people will actually respect. And you'll have permission from yourself to prioritize your peace over other people's expectations. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and get ready to meet the version of yourself who knows when to stay and when to go. The woman who doesn't need permission to leave. The woman who trusts herself completely. The woman who understands that walking away isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the one you were always meant to write. Let's begin. Chapter 2. The Cost of Staying Too Long. Let's talk about something nobody wants to admit. The real cost of staying too long isn't the time you lose. It's who you become. When you spend months or years in a situation that requires you to shrink, silence your intuition, and betray your own needs, just to keep the peace, you transform. And not in a good way. You become smaller, quieter, more apologetic, less certain of what you want and whether you deserve to have it. The devastating part? This transformation happens so gradually you don't notice until you look in the mirror one day and barely recognize who's staring back. Think about a plant kept in a pot that's too small. At first it looks fine, growing, blooming, doing what plants do. But over time, the roots have nowhere to go. They circle around and around, wrapping back on themselves, becoming root-bound. The plant stops thriving. It survives technically, but it's stunted. Capable of so much more if only someone would transplant it. That's what happens to you when you stay too long. Your potential starts to wrap around itself because there's nowhere for it to go. You learn to make yourself smaller to fit into confines that were never big enough to hold all of who you are. And the tragedy is that you start to believe this diminished version is all you're capable of being. Let me give you specific examples because the cost isn't abstract. It's measurable and heartbreakingly common. There's Maria, a software engineer who stays at a startup where her male colleagues consistently take credit for her code. At first, she speaks up. She documents her contributions. But after months of being told she's not a team player when she advocates for herself, she stops trying. She learns that her voice doesn't matter. Fast forward 2 years, she's in salary negotiations at a new company and accepts $15,000 less than market rate because she's internalized that her work isn't as valuable. She's carried the diminishment with her. There's James, who stays in a relationship where his partner mocks his career aspirations. You're going to start a business. With what money? Be realistic. At first, he defends his dreams. But after hearing variations of this for 3 years, he stops mentioning his goals. He stops having them. 5 years later, when a friend asks what happened to his entrepreneurial plans, he can't remember why he gave up. The dream didn't die dramatically. It was slowly suffocated. There's Keisha, who maintains a friendship with someone from high school who only calls when she needs something. Never asks how Keisha's doing. Cancels plans last minute. Doesn't show up for important moments. Keisha keeps answering because we've known each other forever. What's the cost? She becomes someone who attracts takers. Her dating life is full of people who expect her to give everything and offer nothing. She's trained herself that this is what relationships look like. Do you see the pattern? The cost of staying too long isn't just about what you endure in the moment. It's about how staying rewires your understanding of what you deserve, what's normal, and what's possible. Every day you stay in a situation that doesn't honor you, you're sending yourself a message. You're telling yourself this is acceptable. That you can tolerate this level of disrespect, that your needs are negotiable, that your boundaries are optional, that your peace is worth sacrificing. And here's what neuroscience tells us. The brain is incredibly adaptable. It will normalize almost anything if you expose it to that thing long enough. This is called hedonic adaptation. Your baseline for what's acceptable adjusts to whatever you're consistently experiencing. This is why people stay in objectively terrible situations for years and genuinely don't realize how bad it's gotten. The bar lowers so incrementally that you don't notice. You're like the proverbial frog in boiling water. The temperature increases so gradually that you don't jump out, even though you're being cooked alive. You don't stay because you're weak. You stay because the deterioration happens so slowly that each day doesn't feel much different from the day before. The disrespect that would have sent you running on day 1 feels manageable by day 300 because you've already survived 299 days of it. But here's what you need to understand. Just because you can survive something doesn't mean you should. Just because you've adapted to dysfunction doesn't mean the dysfunction is okay. Just because you've learned to live with less doesn't mean you should stop wanting more. The cost shows up in your body too. Your nervous system knows the truth, even when your mind is busy making excuses. It knows when you're not safe, not valued, expending enormous energy just to maintain something fundamentally unsustainable. Research on chronic stress from Stanford's Robert Sapolsky shows that sustained activation of the stress response suppresses immune function, disrupts digestion, and impairs cognitive function. That chronic tension in your shoulders, those unexplained headaches, the stomach issues your doctor can't quite explain, the insomnia where you're exhausted but can't stop your racing mind. Your body is trying to tell you what your mind doesn't want to accept. This situation is costing more than you can afford to pay. And then there's opportunity cost. Every moment you spend trying to fix something fundamentally broken is a moment you're not available for something that could actually fulfill you. Every ounce of energy you pour into someone who doesn't appreciate it is energy. You're not investing in yourself, your dreams, or people who would cherish what you offer. Think about it economically. You have limited emotional currency to spend each day. You can invest it in situations and people that drain you, where you're constantly fighting for scraps of validation. Or you can invest it where that same energy is multiplied, appreciated, and returned. The economist Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize partly for his work on loss aversion. Humans feel the pain of losing something about twice as strongly as the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. This is why people stay in bad situations. The potential loss feels more real than potential gain. But this emotional math is misleading you. Women who stay too long often look back years later and realize their biggest regret isn't the time lost. It's the person they became. The dreams they stopped pursuing because they were too depleted. The opportunities they didn't see because they were so focused on making something work that was never going to work. The relationships they could have had if they'd been available when the right person came along. Here's what I need you to hear. The sunk cost fallacy is a trap. The idea that you've already invested so much time, energy, emotion, resources means you should keep investing even when it's clearly not working is one of the most destructive patterns in human decision-making. You wouldn't keep pouring water into a bucket with a hole just because you've already poured a gallon in. You wouldn't keep eating a terrible meal because you've already eaten half of it. You wouldn't keep watching a movie you hate just because you've sat through an hour. So why do you keep staying in situations actively harming you just because you've already stayed this long, because you've been taught to see leaving as failure, to view walking away as giving up, to believe that perseverance means staying no matter what, even when no matter what includes your own well-being? But real strength isn't about enduring what you shouldn't have to endure. It's about having the clarity to recognize when something isn't serving you and the courage to choose differently. The women who know when to walk away understand something crucial. Staying isn't always brave. Sometimes staying is the coward's choice. It's easier to stay in familiar dysfunction than to face the unknown. It's easier to keep hoping things will magically improve than to accept they won't and act accordingly. Walking away requires you to bet on yourself, to trust you'll be okay without this person, this job, this situation you've convinced yourself you can't live without, to believe you deserve better, even when you can't yet see what that better looks like. Yes, it's scary. Change is always scary. Uncertainty is uncomfortable. But you know what's scarier? Waking up 5 years from now and realizing you wasted them. Looking back and seeing you knew what you needed to do but didn't do it. Becoming someone you don't recognize because you stayed somewhere that required you to abandon yourself. The cost of staying too long is too high. Your peace of mind is too valuable. Your time is too precious. Your potential is too vast to be contained in spaces that were never meant to hold you. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about exactly how to recognize when it's time to go, because sometimes the signs are obvious, but often they're subtle. And if you've been in the situation for a while, you've learned to explain them away, but your gut knows. And it's time to start listening. Chapter 3. The 6 Signs. It's time to walk away. Your intuition is not paranoia, that feeling in your gut that something is wrong. It's not you being dramatic, oversensitive, or asking for too much. It's your inner wisdom trying to protect you from a situation your mind hasn't fully processed yet. But here's the problem. You've been conditioned to doubt that intuition, to second-guess yourself, to look for concrete proof before you're allowed to trust what you feel. So you stay, waiting for the situation to get bad enough that leaving feels justified. Stop waiting for permission. You don't need it. You don't need proof. You don't need it to get worse. You just need to recognize the signs and trust yourself enough to act on them. Here are the 6 signs that it's time to walk away. Not maybes. Not things you can fix with better communication. When you see these patterns showing up consistently, not just once in a moment of stress, but as the baseline, it's time to go. Sign 1. You're constantly making excuses for them. Listen to how you talk about this person or situation to others. Are you always explaining away their behavior? Justifying why they acted that way? Providing context that makes their actions seem more acceptable? She's just really stressed at work right now. He had a difficult childhood, so he doesn't know how to communicate. The company is going through a transition period. They don't really mean it when they say those things. When you find yourself as defense attorney for someone hurting you, something is deeply wrong. Because people who genuinely care about you don't put you in a position where you have to constantly explain their behavior. Psychologist John Gottman's research on relationships shows that contempt and defensiveness are 2 of the 4 horsemen that predict relationship failure with over 90% accuracy. When you're defending someone's behavior to yourself, you're already in the danger zone. Good relationships, romantic, platonic, or professional, don't require a constant PR campaign. You're not supposed to be managing other people's perception of how you're being treated. And the most insidious part? The more you make excuses for someone, the more you convince yourself the situation is acceptable. You become complicit in your own mistreatment. You gaslight yourself on their behalf. Stop it. If you need to constantly explain why someone's behavior is okay, it's not okay. If you're spending more energy justifying their actions than they're spending improving them, you're in the wrong relationship. Sign 2. You're walking on eggshells. You know this feeling, that low-level anxiety humming in the background of your interactions, that constant calculation you're doing about what you can say, how you can say it, what mood they're in, whether now is a good time. You monitor your tone, you choose words carefully, you edit yourself constantly because you've learned that certain topics, certain requests, certain needs will be met with defensiveness, anger, or withdrawal. So you make yourself smaller, quieter, less demanding. You start sentences with, "I don't want to upset you, but," or, "I know this is probably my fault, but." You apologize for having needs. You frame reasonable requests as huge impositions. You tiptoe around someone else's emotional fragility while completely ignoring your own. This is not how healthy relationships function. Research from the University of California on relationship satisfaction shows that couples where both partners feel they can express needs openly report 47% higher satisfaction than those where one partner self-silences. You should not have to perform emotional gymnastics just to express basic needs or boundaries. You should not have to carefully manage someone else's reactions to your legitimate feelings. When you're walking on eggshells, you're not in a relationship. You're in a hostage situation where the price of your freedom is keeping someone else comfortable at all costs. And that cost is your authenticity, your peace, and your sense of self. Sign 3. Your gut keeps telling you something is off. This is the sign most people ignore because it doesn't come with evidence. It's just a feeling, a sense that something isn't right. An internal alarm that keeps going off even though everything looks fine on the surface. Maybe they say all the right things, but something about how they say it feels hollow. Maybe the situation looks good on paper, but it feels wrong in your body. Maybe everyone else thinks this is great for you, but you keep having this nagging sense of unease you can't explain. Here's what neuroscience tells us. Intuition is real. Researcher Gerd Gigerenzer from the Max Planck Institute has shown that gut feelings are actually rapid pattern recognition. Your brain processing information faster than your conscious mind can articulate. Your gut is picking up on micro-expressions, tone shifts, pattern inconsistencies, behavioral contradictions that your rational brain hasn't fully analyzed yet. It knows things before you know them. Women especially are taught to doubt their intuition, to look for logical explanations, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to not judge too quickly, to be fair and understanding and reasonable. But your intuition doesn't owe anyone fairness. It's not a court of law requiring evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. It's your internal guidance system, and its only job is to keep you safe and aligned with your highest good. Stop demanding that your gut provide you with a dissertation defending its position. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And you don't need to understand why before you're allowed to act on it. Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, documents numerous cases where people's snap judgments, their gut reactions, were more accurate than their carefully considered decisions. Your intuition is sophisticated. Trust it. Sign 4, you're the only one fighting for this. Look at the effort ratio. Who's initiating conversations about problems? Who's suggesting solutions? Who's reading books, listening to podcasts, going to therapy, doing the work to make things better? If the answer is only you, that's your sign. You cannot fix a relationship that only one person wants to improve. You cannot make someone care about something they're indifferent to. You cannot love someone into loving you back the way you deserve. And this doesn't just apply to romantic relationships. This shows up in friendships where you're always the one reaching out, making plans, checking in jobs where you're the only one invested in excellence while everyone else coasts, in families where you're the only one trying to heal dysfunction while everyone else pretends it's normal. Research on equity theory from behavioral psychology shows that relationships where effort is consistently imbalanced lead to resentment in the over-contributor and entitlement in the under-contributor. The pattern reinforces itself. When you're the only one fighting, you're not in a partnership. You're in a one-person show where you've cast yourself in every role, including the person who's supposed to be showing up for you. And here's the devastating part. The harder you fight alone, the more they learn they don't have to fight at all. Your solo effort enables their inaction. Your willingness to carry the full weight means they never have to pick up their share. Stop fighting alone. If someone values what you bring, they'll show up. If they don't show up, they've already told you everything you need to know about how much this matters to them. Sign 5. You've lost yourself. Trying to be what they need. Who were you before this? What did you love? What lit you up? What were your dreams, your standards, your non-negotiables? Now look at who you've become. Have you abandoned hobbies because they take time away from managing this relationship? Have you stopped seeing friends because you're too exhausted from the emotional labor you're performing? Have you lowered your standards so much you barely recognize them? The right people, situations, and opportunities don't require you to abandon yourself. They might challenge you to grow, absolutely. But they don't demand that you become smaller, quieter, less vibrant, less yourself. Psychologist Carl Rogers' work on self-concept shows that when there's too much incongruence between your authentic self and the self you're presenting to maintain a relationship, it creates psychological distress that manifests as anxiety, depression, and loss of identity. When you've stopped doing things that used to bring you joy, stopped expressing opinions that might cause conflict, stopped pursuing goals because they're not convenient for someone else's agenda, you've crossed the line from compromise into self-abandonment. And the most dangerous part? This happens so gradually you don't notice until you're barely a shell of who you used to be. You make one small accommodation, then another, then another. Each one seems reasonable in isolation, but collectively they add up to a complete erasure of your identity. Ask yourself, if you remove this person or situation from your life, would you recognize yourself? Would you like who you'd become? Would the person you were 5 years ago be proud of who you are now? If the answer is no, if the answer is anything other than an absolute unequivocal yes, you have your answer about whether it's time to walk away. Sign 6. The good moments aren't making up for the bad. Anymore, every relationship has difficulties. Every job has frustrating days. Every situation has its challenges. That's not the question. The question is, are the good times outweighing the bad? Is the joy you experience worth the pain? Is the benefit worth the cost to your mental health? When you're staying because of who someone used to be, or who they are on their best days, or who they promise they'll become, rather than who they consistently are, you're not in a relationship with reality. You're in a relationship with potential. And potential doesn't keep you warm at night. It doesn't show up when you need support. It doesn't protect your peace. Behavioral economist Dan Ariely's research on decision-making shows that humans consistently overweight potential future gains while underweighting present costs. We're wired to be overly optimistic about improvement that isn't actually happening. You deserve actual goodness, not occasional glimpses of it between long stretches of disappointment. You deserve consistent care, not sporadic bursts that keep you hooked and hoping. if you're having to remind yourself of the good times to justify staying through the bad times, if you're mentally compiling evidence that this is worth it because you can't feel it in your body anymore, if you're convincing yourself that rare moments of peace are enough to make up for constant undercurrent of stress, you already know the truth. The good isn't good enough anymore. And you're allowed to want more than good enough. These 6 signs aren't appearing in your life by accident. They're not coincidences. They're not phases that will pass if you just wait them out. They're information, data about the reality of your situation, not the story you've been telling yourself about it. And when you see multiple signs showing up consistently, when you can check off 3, 4, 5 of these boxes, you don't need more time to be sure. You don't need more chances to see if things will change. You don't need permission from anyone. You just need the courage to trust yourself and walk away. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why that's so hard. Because knowing you should leave and actually leaving are 2 very different things. Chapter 4. What's really keeping you stuck? You know you should leave. You've known for a while. You've seen the signs. You've felt the cost. You've had conversations with friends where you hear yourself making the same complaints you made 6 months ago, a year ago, maybe longer. So why are you still there? Stop blaming yourself for weakness. That's not what's happening here. There are specific psychological mechanisms keeping you stuck, and once you understand them, you can dismantle their power over you. Let's talk about what's really happening. The fear of the unknown. Right now, as much as your situation hurts, it's familiar. You know the shape of this pain. You know how to navigate it. You've developed coping mechanisms, survival strategies, ways of managing the disappointment that have become second nature. Leaving means stepping into complete uncertainty. You don't know if you'll be okay financially. You don't know if you'll find another relationship, another job, another friend group. You don't know how people will react. You don't know what your life will look like on the other side. And your brain, that incredible survival machine, is wired to treat unknown threats as more dangerous than known ones. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux's research on the amygdala shows that your brain's fear center responds more intensely to uncertain threats than to known dangers, even when the known danger is objectively worse. Your brain would rather keep you in documented misery than risk undocumented possibility, because at least misery is predictable. This is why women stay in relationships where they're unhappy but not being actively abused. Why they remain in jobs that are soul-crushing but not technically hostile. Why they maintain friendships that drain them but don't cross any obvious lines. The dysfunction is tolerable enough that the fear of what comes next feels more threatening than the reality of what is. But here's what your fear-based brain isn't telling you. The unknown isn't empty. It's not a void. It's full of possibility that you can't access while you're still clinging to what's not working. Every moment you spend in the familiar prison of this situation is a moment you're not available for something better. The opportunity cost is invisible to you right now, but it's real. Women who successfully walk away aren't fearless. They're terrified. The difference is, they've decided that staying is scarier than leaving. That the certain misery of continuing is worse than the uncertain possibility of starting over. The sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested so much time, so much energy, so much hope, so much of yourself. If you leave now, all of that was for nothing, right? If you walk away, you're admitting those years were wasted, that those efforts were futile, that you were wrong about this person, this job, this path. This is the sunk cost fallacy, the economic principle that says people continue investing in something because they've already invested so much, even when it's clear the investment won't pay off. Economist Richard Thaler won a Nobel Prize, partly for documenting how irrational this pattern is. Gamblers do this, doubling down on losses. Businesses do this, pouring money into failing projects. And you do this, staying in situations that are clearly not working because leaving feels like admitting defeat. But here's the truth. The sunk cost fallacy obscures. The time and energy you've already invested is gone, regardless of what you do next. You can't get it back. The only question that actually matters is what you do with the time you have left. Staying doesn't honor what you've invested. It compounds the loss. Every additional day you spend in a situation that's not serving you isn't loyalty to your past investment. It's throwing good time after bad. Think about it this way. If you went to a restaurant and ordered a meal that tasted terrible, would you force yourself to finish the entire plate just because you already paid for it? Or would you stop eating, cut your losses, and go somewhere else that actually serves good food? The investment you should be concerned about protecting isn't the time you've already spent. It's the time you have remaining. And the best way to honor what you've been through is to refuse to waste another moment of your precious, finite life on something that's never going to give you what you need. The rescue fantasy, deep down, you're still hoping they'll change, that something will click for them and they'll finally become the person you've been waiting for them to be. That the job will get better when they hire more people, when the busy season ends, when new management takes over, that the friend will realize how one-sided things have been and start showing up differently. This hope is what keeps you checking your phone for the text that shows they finally get it. What keeps you giving them one more chance, and then another, and then another. What keeps you analyzing every small positive change as evidence that real transformation is coming? You're not staying for who they are. You're staying for who you believe they could be if they just tried, if they just cared enough, if they just saw your value. This is the rescue fantasy, and it's one of the most seductive traps in human psychology. Psychologist Harriet Lerner calls this change-back behavior. The unconscious belief that if you just do the right thing, say the right words, become the right version of yourself, you can make someone else change. It doesn't work that way, because occasionally, just often enough to keep you hooked, you get a glimpse of the person or situation you're hoping for. They have a good week. They say something that feels like understanding. They make a small change that looks like progress, and your brain latches onto that evidence and says, "See, I told you they could change. This is the beginning. If you leave now, you'll miss the transformation you've been working toward all this time." This is intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful form of behavioral conditioning. B.F. Skinner's research showed that behaviors reinforced occasionally and unpredictably are harder to extinguish than behaviors reinforced consistently. Slot machines work on this principle, so do toxic relationships, but transformation that only happens in response to you threatening to leave isn't transformation. It's manipulation. It's damage control. It's doing the bare minimum to keep you around, not because they genuinely want to be different, but because they don't want to lose what you provide. Real change happens when someone decides they want to be different for themselves, not when they're trying to prevent you from leaving. Real change is sustained, consistent, and doesn't require constant prompting, threatening, or pleading. If you've been waiting for them to change for months or years, they're not going to. Not because change is impossible, but because they don't want it enough, and you can't want it for them. You can't love someone into growth. You can't care someone into becoming who you need them to be. The person you're hoping will show up, they're not coming. And the longer you wait, the longer you're unavailable for someone who already is what you need. The identity crisis. Sometimes you stay because leaving would require you to completely reimagine who you are. Maybe you've built your identity around being the person who sticks it out, who doesn't give up, who makes things work no matter what. Leaving would mean admitting that perseverance has limits, that sometimes the strong choice is to quit, not to continue. Maybe you've told everyone about this relationship, this job, this move you made. You've made it part of your story. Leaving means having to explain the change, admit you were wrong, face the judgment or pity or I told you so's from people who never thought it was a good idea to begin with. Maybe this situation has become so central to how you spend your time and energy that you don't know who you are without it. If you're not the girlfriend trying to fix him, the employee trying to prove herself, the friend trying to earn someone's consistent presence, who are you? Psychologist Erik Erikson's work on identity formation shows that humans have a powerful need for identity continuity. When circumstances threaten our sense of who we are, we experience existential anxiety that can be more uncomfortable than staying in a bad situation. This identity crisis keeps you stuck because leaving doesn't just mean losing the situation, it means losing the version of yourself you've built around that situation. And that can feel like death, even when that version of yourself is exhausted and diminished and desperately unhappy. But here's what you need to understand. The self you're clinging to isn't your real self. It's the self you created to survive a situation that requires you to be smaller than you actually are. Losing that self isn't a tragedy, it's a liberation. The woman on the other side of walking away isn't less than who you are now. She's more authentic, more aligned, more integrated. She's who you become when you're not spending all your energy managing dysfunction and making excuses. The fear of hurting them, you stay because you don't want to be the bad guy. You don't want to hurt them, disappoint them, let them down. Even if they've hurt you repeatedly, even if they've shown through their actions that your pain doesn't concern them much, you still can't bear the thought of causing them pain. This is the empathy trap, and it primarily affects people who've been socialized to prioritize others' feelings over their own, which, research shows, disproportionately affects women across cultures. You've been taught that being a good person means protecting other people from discomfort, even at the cost of your own well-being. That breaking up with someone, quitting a job, ending a friendship makes you mean selfish, cold. So you stay, sacrificing your peace to preserve theirs. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. Who's protecting you? While you're over here managing their feelings, cushioning their disappointment, trying to leave in the kindest possible way, or not leaving at all because you can't figure out how to do it without them being upset. Who's worrying about your feelings? Probably not them. Because if they cared about your feelings as much as you care about theirs, you wouldn't be in a situation where you need to leave in the first place. Brené Brown's research on boundaries shows that the most compassionate people are also the most boundaried. They understand that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. And staying in a situation that's destroying you because leaving might hurt someone else's feelings is exactly that. If someone is so fragile that you asserting your needs or leaving a situation that doesn't serve you devastates them, that's information about them, not evidence that you should stay. Healthy people don't fall apart when others set boundaries. Manipulative people, however, weaponize their pain to keep you trapped. The practical concerns, and then there are the real, tangible, practical reasons you stay. The shared lease, the financial dependence, the custody arrangements, the health insurance, the fact that all your friends are also their friends and you don't know who you'd have left. These aren't imaginary concerns. They're real obstacles that require real planning to overcome. Pretending they don't matter, that love or strength or willpower should be enough to make you leave regardless of practical consequences, is naive and unhelpful. But here's the distinction you need to make. Practical concerns are reasons to plan carefully. They're not reasons to stay indefinitely. If you need to save money before you can leave, start saving. Open a separate account they don't know about. If you need to find your own place, start looking. If you need to build a support system separate from this situation, start building. If you need to document things for legal purposes, start documenting. What's keeping you stuck isn't that these problems are insurmountable. It's that you're using them as reasons not to even start planning. You're treating them as permanent barriers rather than temporary challenges that require navigation. Research on goal setting from psychologist Gabriele Oettingen shows that people who use mental contrasting, imagining both their desired future and the obstacles in the way, then making specific plans to overcome those obstacles, are significantly more likely to achieve their goals than people who just fantasize or just focus on obstacles. Yes, leaving might be complicated. It might require months of preparation. It might mean making some sacrifices in the short term. But staying forever because leaving is complicated is choosing lifelong unhappiness over temporary difficulty. Start where you are. Make a plan. Take small steps, but start. Because every day you wait for the perfect moment when leaving will be easy and convenient is a day you're choosing to stay stuck. None of these forces keeping you stuck are signs of weakness. They're signs of being human. Understanding them doesn't make them go away, but it does make them visible. And once you can see what's operating under the surface, you can start to challenge its power over your choices. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about how to actually do it, how to walk away with grace, dignity, and finality, because understanding why you need to leave is only half the equation. Having the tools to actually execute that exit is what transforms knowledge into freedom. Chapter 5. The Art of the Elegant Exit. There's a way to leave that protects your peace, preserves your dignity, and positions you for what's next. And then there's the way most people do it. Messy, emotional, full of explanations and justifications and attempts to make the other person understand. Let me be clear, the goal of walking away is not to teach them a lesson. It's not to make them see what they lost. It's not to get closure or the final word or validation that you were right to leave. The goal is to extract yourself from a situation that's not serving you with as little drama and damage as possible. This is what I call the elegant exit. And it requires you to fundamentally rethink how endings work. Most people approach leaving like it's a negotiation. They present their case, list grievances, explain their reasoning, and wait for the other person to agree that yes, leaving makes sense. They're seeking permission or understanding or some acknowledgement that they're justified. This is a trap. You don't need anyone's permission to leave. You don't need them to understand your reasons. You don't need them to agree with your decision or validate your experience. You especially don't need to convince them that you're right to go. The elegant exit is about making a decision for yourself and executing it cleanly, regardless of how the other person responds. It's about being clear, being kind when possible, but firm when necessary, and being completely unmoved by attempts to pull you back in. Let's break down exactly how this works. Step 1. Make the decision privately. Before you say a word to anyone else, you need to be completely certain in yourself that you're leaving. This isn't a threat. This isn't a negotiation tactic. This isn't a test to see how they'll react. This is a decision you've made after careful consideration, and nothing they say or do is going to change it. This internal certainty is crucial because the moment you announce your intention to leave, you're going to face pushback. They're going to promise to change. They're going to bring up all the good times. They're going to tell you you're making a mistake, that you're overreacting, that you owe them another chance. Research from the University of Texas on decision-making shows that when people publicly commit to a decision before they're internally certain, they're 60% more likely to reverse that decision under social pressure. If you haven't solidified your decision before this conversation, you'll waver, you'll second-guess yourself, you'll get pulled back in by promises that sound sincere in the moment but won't materialize in reality. So before you say anything, sit with yourself, journal about it, talk to trusted friends who have your best interests at heart, not mutual friends who have a stake in you staying. Make a list of all the reasons you're leaving and read it every day until those reasons feel more real than any promise to change. Get to the place where you know, bone deep, that you're done, where you're not hoping they'll fight for you or give you a reason to stay, where you're actually ready to go, not just threatening to go to provoke a reaction. Only then are you ready for the conversation. Step 2, choose your timing and setting strategically. Don't have this conversation when you're angry, when they're drunk, when either of you is exhausted, or when there's an audience. Don't do it over text unless safety is a concern and you genuinely cannot have this conversation in person. Choose a time when you're both relatively calm, when you have privacy, and when you have enough time to have the full conversation without rushing. But also choose a time when you can leave afterward. Don't do this right before bed when you're still sharing a space. Don't do it right before a family event where you'll be forced to interact immediately after. Don't do it when you have nowhere else to go. For romantic relationships, this might mean having the conversation at their place so you can leave when it's done. Or in a neutral public space if you're concerned about how they'll react. For jobs, this means having your resignation letter ready and a plan for how you'll handle the transition. The setting matters because it affects the energy of the conversation. You want to minimize the chance of escalation, manipulation, or getting sucked into a circular argument that goes nowhere. Psychologist Albert Mehrabian's research shows that communication is 7% verbal, 38% tone, and 55% body language. Control the environment, and you control much of the interaction. Step 3. Be clear and direct. Here's where most people fail. They soften the message so much in an attempt to be kind that the other person doesn't actually understand that this is over. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. Handling the Void. Without going back. You did it. You walked away. You had the conversation, held your boundary, followed through, and now you're sitting in the space you created, and it feels terrible. Nobody tells you about this part. All the empowerment content focuses on the moment of leaving, the brave decision, the dramatic exit. But nobody talks about what happens the day after, the week after, when the adrenaline fades and you're left with the raw reality of what you've done. You feel empty, lonely, like you made a huge mistake, like maybe what you had wasn't actually that bad, like you should just text them and say you overreacted, that you want to work it out, that you miss them. This is the void, and this is where most people break. Let me be very clear, this feeling is not a sign that you made the wrong decision. It's evidence that you're going through withdrawal from something your nervous system had adapted to. even though that thing was slowly destroying you. The void after leaving is not evidence you need to go back. It's evidence you were deeply enmeshed in something and your brain is mourning the loss of the familiar, even when familiar was toxic. Understanding what's actually happening in the aftermath is crucial to not sabotaging your own freedom. The withdrawal period is real. When you've been in any situation for a significant period, your brain has built neural pathways around it. You have routines, patterns, ways of structuring your day, and your emotional energy around this person or situation. When it suddenly disappears, your brain doesn't care whether it was healthy or unhealthy. It just knows that something it was used to is gone. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz's research on dopamine shows that your brain has prediction systems that expect certain patterns. When those patterns break, you experience withdrawal symptoms similar to substance addiction. This is why you can leave a terrible relationship and still feel devastated. Why you can quit a toxic job and still miss aspects of it. Why you can end a draining friendship and still feel the impulse to reach out. Your brain is experiencing withdrawal, and dysfunction can be addictive. The drama, the intensity, the emotional roller coaster, the hope and disappointment cycle, all of this creates neurochemical patterns that crave continuation even when it's harmful. Research from the University of Maryland on intermittent reinforcement shows that unpredictable rewards create stronger addiction than consistent rewards. That's why toxic relationships are so hard to leave. The occasional good moments created stronger bonds than healthy, consistent relationships. During withdrawal, you're going to romanticize what you left. Your brain will conveniently forget all the reasons you needed to go and flood you with memories of the good times. That one perfect day, that moment when they were exactly who you needed them to be, that time when you felt happy and connected and hopeful. This is not reality. This is your brain trying to get you to return to what's familiar because familiar feels safer than unknown, even when familiar is objectively terrible. When these romanticized memories flood your mind, do something specific. Get out whatever method you used to document why you left. The journal entries from your worst days, the texts to your friends where you were crying about how you couldn't do this anymore, the list of red flags you ignored for too long. Read them, all of them. Let the reality of what you actually experienced, not the selective highlight reel your brain is showing you, inform your present moment. The withdrawal period typically lasts 2 to 8 weeks, depending on how long you were in the situation and how enmeshed you became. During this time, your only job is not to go back. You don't have to feel good about your decision yet. You don't have to be thriving. You just have to not reverse course. Grief is valid, but not a reason to return. Even when you leave something that was hurting you, you're allowed to grieve it. In fact, you need to grieve it. Because grief isn't just about whether something was good or bad. It's about acknowledging that something that existed no longer does. You're grieving the future you thought you'd have, the plans you made, the version of them you hoped would eventually show up, the time you invested, the person you were when you first started, when you still had hope. You're also grieving the identity you built around this situation. Psychologist William Bridges' work on transitions shows that endings involve letting go of an old identity before a new one emerges. That in-between space is called the neutral zone, and it's profoundly uncomfortable. Let yourself feel this grief. Cry when you need to cry. Be sad. Acknowledge that something ended. And endings are inherently difficult even when they're necessary. But, and this is crucial, do not let grief become an excuse to go back. Grief is a process, not a reason to undo a decision you made for valid reasons. You can be sad about what you lost while still knowing that leaving was right. You can miss aspects of what you had while recognizing that the whole package was unsustainable. The healthiest way to process grief is to actually feel it rather than trying to skip over it to get to the "I'm fine and thriving" part. Set aside time to sit with the sadness. Talk to friends who understand. Write letters you'll never send. Create rituals that help you process the ending, but also set boundaries around your grief. Don't let it consume your entire day, every day. Schedule time for it, and then schedule time for other things. Time for rebuilding, for rediscovering yourself, for moving forward. Loneliness is temporary. Settling is permanent. The void often manifests most acutely as loneliness, especially if the situation you left was a relationship or close friendship. You're suddenly missing that person to text, to call, to share your day with. This loneliness feels unbearable. It makes you question whether being alone is worth it, whether you should lower your standards just so you don't have to feel this way. Here's what you need to understand. Loneliness is temporary, but settling is permanent. Right now, in this moment, you're lonely because there's space in your life that used to be occupied, but that space is not going to stay empty forever. Research from the University of Chicago on social connection shows that loneliness motivates us to seek new connections. It's an adaptive signal, not a permanent state. That space is going to fill with new people, new experiences, new versions of connection that actually serve you. But it can only fill with those things if you keep the space open. If you run back to what doesn't work just to avoid feeling lonely, you're choosing temporary relief over long-term fulfillment. The loneliness you feel right now is not the loneliness of being unlovable. It's the loneliness of transition. You're between chapters. You've closed one door and the new one hasn't opened yet. That in-between space is uncomfortable, but it's not permanent. Instead of running from loneliness, use it. Use this time to get to know yourself again. To remember who you are when you're not constantly managing someone else's emotions or needs. To rediscover what you actually enjoy, what actually lights you up, what you actually want. Take yourself on dates. Try new things. Reconnect with friends you neglected while you were consumed by the situation you just left. Build a relationship with yourself strong enough that you never again settle for less just to avoid being alone. Stop checking on them. You're going to want to know how they're doing, whether they're okay, whether they miss you, whether they're already moving on, or still hoping you'll come back. This urge is going to feel overwhelming. You'll find yourself opening their social media, driving past their place, asking mutual friends for updates. You'll convince yourself you just want to make sure they're okay, that you're not being malicious, that it's normal to care about someone even after you've left. Stop. Every time you check on them, you're reopening a wound that's trying to heal. You're keeping yourself emotionally tethered to something you worked so hard to walk away from. You're preventing yourself from actually moving forward. Research on cognitive closure from psychologist Ari Kruglansky shows that checking behaviors provide temporary anxiety relief but prevent long-term healing. Each check resets your healing timeline. And here's the hard truth: how they're doing is no longer your business. Whether they're devastated or thriving, whether they've learned from this or are repeating the same patterns with someone else, whether they understand why you left or are painting you as the villain, none of that matters. Your job is not to monitor their recovery or manage their narrative. Your job is to protect your own peace and rebuild your own life. Every time you feel the urge to check on them, ask yourself, what am I actually looking for? Am I hoping to see their suffering so I feel validated? Am I hoping to see they're fine so I don't feel guilty? Am I hoping to see they've changed so I have an excuse to go back? None of these impulses serve you. All of them keep you stuck in the past instead of moving toward your future. Closure is something you give yourself around week 3 or 4 after the initial shock has worn off and you're starting to stabilize. You might feel like you need closure. One more conversation where you really explain yourself, where you make sure they understand why you left, where you get answers to lingering questions. This is a trap. Closure is not something someone else gives you. It's something you give yourself by accepting that the relationship ended, that you made the best decision you could with the information you had, and that you're choosing to move forward. The closure conversation you're fantasizing about doesn't exist. You're not going to have a calm, mature discussion where they suddenly understand everything and validate your decision. Psychologist Pauline Boss's research on ambiguous loss shows that seeking closure from others often perpetuates suffering rather than resolving it. What's actually going to happen is you're going to open the door to re-engagement. They're going to use the opportunity to try to change your mind. Or you're going to get pulled back into old patterns of explaining and defending yourself. Or the conversation is going to leave you feeling worse, not better, because they're still not capable of giving you what you need. Real closure comes from accepting that some questions don't have answers, that some people will never understand your perspective, that some endings are messy and unresolved, and that's okay. You close the door yourself by choosing to stop seeking something from them that they've proven they can't or won't provide. Healing is not linear. You're going to have days where you feel great, where you're excited about your future, where you can't believe you stayed as long as you did, where you feel proud of yourself for leaving And then you're going to have days where all of that disappears and you're right back in the pain and doubt and longing. This is not failure. This is not evidence that you're not healing or that you made the wrong choice. This is how healing actually works. Research on grief and recovery from Columbia University shows that healing follows a pattern called oscillation, moving back and forth between processing the loss and moving forward with life. Both are necessary. Neither is a setback outnumber the bad days. The setbacks become less frequent and less intense. The moments where you question your decision become shorter and easier to navigate. But expecting yourself to feel consistently good right away is setting yourself up for disappointment. Healing takes time. Be patient with yourself. Track your progress. Notice when you go a full day without thinking about them. Notice when you feel genuinely happy about something unrelated to them. Notice when your first thought in the morning isn't about them. These are the markers of real healing. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the most important part, who you become when you're no longer defined by what you left behind. Because the point of walking away isn't just to escape something bad, it's to create space for something better, and that better starts with you. Chapter 7, Rebuilding Your Identity. After walking away. Here's the part nobody prepares you for. After you walk away, you have to figure out who the hell you are without the thing you left behind. And I'm not talking about some gentle journey of self-discovery where you journal with a cup of tea and slowly piece yourself back together. I'm talking about the disorienting, uncomfortable reality of looking in the mirror and barely recognizing the person staring back at you. You've spent months, maybe years, being someone's girlfriend, someone's employee, someone's best friend, someone's project. You built your entire identity around managing that situation, accommodating that person, making yourself fit into whatever space they made available for you. And now you're nobody's anything. And you have no idea who you are when you're not defined by what you were trying to fix. This is the rebuilding phase. And if you think walking away was hard, try reconstructing yourself from scratch while your brain is screaming at you to go back to what was familiar. Stop trying to find yourself. First thing you need to understand, there is no real you waiting to be discovered. There's no authentic self buried under all the damage, just waiting for you to excavate it with enough meditation and self-reflection. That version of you that existed before? She's gone. She made choices that led you into the situation you just escaped. She ignored red flags, tolerated disrespect, stayed when she should have left. You can't go back to being her because she wasn't equipped to protect you. So stop romanticizing who you used to be. Stop trying to find yourself like you're a lost set of keys. You're not lost. You're under construction. The question isn't, who was I before all this? The question is, who am I choosing to become now that I know what I won't tolerate? Reclaim your preferences. Actually do it. Everyone talks about rediscovering what you like, what you want, what makes you happy. But nobody tells you how hard this actually is when you've spent years adapting to someone else's preferences. You probably don't even know what you like anymore. You've trained yourself to want what's convenient for the relationship, to enjoy what makes them happy, to prefer whatever causes the least conflict. So here's what you do. Start making decisions purely because you want to, not because it makes sense, not because it's practical, not because anyone else would approve. Order the food that sounds good, not the food that's healthy or responsible. Wear the outfit that makes you feel alive, even if it's too much for a Tuesday. Watch the show you're curious about, not the one everyone says you should watch. Spend money on something completely frivolous that you just want. Every single time you choose something purely because you want it, you're sending yourself a message. Your preferences matter. Your desires are valid. You don't need permission to want what you want, and pay attention to your body's response. What actually energizes you? What genuinely makes you feel lighter? Because your body hasn't learned to lie to itself the way your mind has. Set standards. You'll actually enforce. Writing down what you want in a journal is useless if you fold the second someone tests your boundary. You know exactly what you don't want. You just experienced it for months or years. So get specific about what behavior you will never tolerate again. Not disrespect. What exactly did that disrespect look like? The comments, the tone, the way your time was treated as optional. Write it down. Make it concrete. And then comes the part that actually matters. Enforce it immediately when it appears. Not after 3 chances, not after a serious conversation the first time. Someone shows up late without notice, you leave. Someone speaks to you in a tone you don't accept, you end the conversation. Someone makes a promise and doesn't follow through, you stop believing their promises. This is how you prove to yourself that you've changed. The old you gave endless chances. The new you understands that people show you who they are immediately, and you believe them. Stop explaining yourself. You're going to feel pressure to justify your new boundaries, to explain why you need what you need, to make your standards sound reasonable so people don't think you're being difficult. Stop. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. You don't need to justify why you won't tolerate certain behavior. You don't need consensus on whether your boundaries are appropriate. "This doesn't work for me" is a complete sentence. "I'm not available for that" requires no further elaboration. "I don't accept being treated that way" doesn't need a defense. The people who deserve access to you will respect your boundaries without demanding a dissertation on why they exist. The people who push back, who need you to justify basic self-respect, are showing you exactly who they are. Believe them. Build something that makes settling impossible. You want to know why people go back? Because they haven't built anything to replace what they left. They created a void, but didn't fill it with anything meaningful, so the void becomes unbearable and going back feels like relief. Don't make that mistake. Use this time to construct a life you're obsessed with. Not a life that looks good on Instagram. Not a life that impresses people. A life that feels so good to you that the thought of jeopardizing it for someone who doesn't deserve you becomes laughable. Take the class you've been putting off. Start the project you never had energy for. Book the trip you couldn't take because you were managing someone else's schedule. Build the friendships you neglected. Create routines that actually support you instead of just getting you through the day. The goal is simple. Make your life so fulfilling that settling becomes impossible. Not because you're distracting yourself from pain, but because you've genuinely created something better than what you left behind. Stop performing growth. Social media has turned healing into a performance. Everyone's posting about their journey, their transformation, their glow up. And you might feel pressure to do the same, to prove you're okay, to show everyone that you're thriving now. Skip it. Real growth happens in private. It happens in the moments where you choose yourself and nobody's watching. It happens when you enforce a boundary that costs you something. It happens when you sit with discomfort instead of running back to what's familiar. You don't need to narrate your healing. You don't need to post about your progress. You don't need external validation that you're doing this right. Just do the work. The results will speak for themselves. Redefine what success means. If you left a relationship, success is not finding someone new as fast as possible. If you quit a job, success is not immediately landing something equivalent. If you ended a friendship, success is not replacing them with someone else. Success is becoming someone who would never tolerate what you just walked away from. Success is recognizing red flags in week 1 instead of year 1. Success is being alone and genuinely preferring that to settling. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're not trying to fill a space. You're already whole, and anyone who enters your life now is a bonus, not a necessity. This shift changes everything. You're no longer operating from desperation, from fear that you'll end up alone. You're operating from abundance, from the certainty that you're already everything you need. The woman you're becoming. She doesn't negotiate her worth. She doesn't explain her boundaries. She doesn't stay where she's not valued, and she doesn't chase people who aren't choosing her. She spots dysfunction early and exits before she's invested. She trusts herself completely. She builds a life so aligned that protecting it is effortless. She's not cold. She's not closed off. She's just done settling, and that makes her more powerful than she's ever been. You're not trying to find her. You're building her right now. Every boundary you set, every time you choose yourself, every moment you refuse to go back. She's not some future version of you that you'll become eventually. She's who you are the second you decide that walking away was just the beginning. Now keep going. Chapter 8. The woman who never has to walk away again. Here's the beautiful irony of mastering the power of walking away. The better you get at it, the less you have to do it. When you truly embody these principles, when you internalize your own worth and establish unshakable boundaries, something shifts. You stop attracting situations that require dramatic exits. You stop tolerating behavior that would necessitate walking away. You become so skilled at recognizing what doesn't serve you early that you never get deeply entangled in the first place. This is the final evolution. The woman who knows when to walk away becomes the woman who rarely has to, because she's constructed her entire life around people and situations that honor her presence. Let's talk about how you become her. The energy shift is real. There's something that happens when you walk away from what doesn't serve you and successfully rebuild yourself. Your energy changes, not in some abstract metaphysical sense. I'm talking about actual, tangible shifts in how you show up in the world. You stop radiating desperation. You stop giving off the frequency of someone willing to accept crumbs. You stop embodying the energy of a person who needs external validation to feel whole. Research from social psychologist Amy Cuddy shows that body language and self-perception create feedback loops. When you carry yourself differently, people respond differently, which reinforces your new self-concept. Instead, you start radiating self-sufficiency, groundedness, the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who she is and what she will and won't tolerate. And people feel that immediately. The right people are attracted to it. They recognize someone who values herself, and they respond by valuing you too. They see your boundaries and respect them without you having to fight for that respect. The wrong people are repelled by it. They sense you're not someone they can manipulate, take advantage of, or string along. They recognize you won't stay in situations that don't serve you. So they either don't approach at all, or they reveal their true nature quickly and filter themselves out before you're invested. This is not about becoming intimidating or unapproachable. It's about becoming congruent. When your external boundaries match your internal worth, when what you say aligns with what you actually enforce, when you show up as fully yourself without apology or performance, you create an energy field that acts as a natural filter. You don't have to work as hard to protect yourself because your presence itself communicates what you will and won't accept. Spot red flags in real time. Remember all those red flags you missed or explained away in situations you eventually had to walk away from? You're not going to miss them anymore. Once you've been through the pain of staying too long, once you've experienced the cost of ignoring your intuition, once you've walked away and rebuilt yourself, you develop pattern recognition that's almost supernatural. Psychologist Malcolm Gladwell calls this thin slicing, the ability to make accurate judgments based on minimal information. Research shows experts in any domain develop this ability through experience. You notice inconsistencies immediately. When someone's words don't match their actions, you see it in the first week, not the first year. When someone tests your boundaries, you recognize it as testing, not as an innocent mistake. When someone shows you who they are through small behaviors, you believe them, rather than waiting for them to hurt you in bigger ways. This doesn't mean you become paranoid or cynical. It means you become discerning. You give people chances, but not endless chances. You remain open to connection, but not at the cost of your peace. You approach new situations with optimism, but also with clear-eyed awareness. The difference is that now, when you see a red flag, you don't talk yourself out of what you're seeing. You don't make excuses. You don't give them the benefit of the doubt at your own expense. You don't wait to see if it gets worse. You address it immediately, or you walk away immediately, depending on the severity. And because you address things early, before you're deeply invested, walking away doesn't hurt the way it used to. It's a course correction, not a catastrophe. Set boundaries. From day one. Here's what the woman who rarely has to walk away understands. Boundaries are not something you introduce after someone has already violated them repeatedly. Boundaries are established from the very beginning before there's even a problem. This means you're clear about your standards from the first date, the first interview, the first coffee with a potential new friend. You're not waiting to see if they're going to respect you before you communicate what respect looks like. You're establishing the framework up front. Research from Brené Brown on wholehearted living shows that clear is kind. Ambiguity in expectations creates confusion and resentment. Clarity creates safety and trust. This looks like stating your preferences without apology. I don't do late-night texting, but I'm happy to talk during the day. I need advance notice for plans. Last-minute invitations don't work for me. I value direct communication. If something's bothering you, I'd rather know than have you be passive-aggressive. It looks like following through immediately when a boundary is crossed, not after the third time, not after you've had a serious conversation about it. The first time, it looks like being willing to be too much for people who want you to be less, because someone who thinks your boundaries are too much is someone who was planning to violate them. When you set boundaries from the beginning, you accomplish two things. First, you train people on how to treat you before bad patterns develop. Second, you identify incompatibility early, before you're attached, before you've invested, before walking away would be difficult. Most situations you used to have to walk away from never would have developed if you'd established boundaries clearly from the start. The people who couldn't respect those boundaries would have filtered themselves out before you wasted any time on them. Choose different. You know the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If you keep attracting the same type of person who eventually requires you to walk away, if you keep ending up in the same type of situation that doesn't serve you, you have to examine what role you're playing in creating that pattern. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm saying you have power in this, and exercising that power means choosing differently than you've chosen before. If you keep dating emotionally unavailable people, you have to ask yourself why you're attracted to emotional unavailability. Research from attachment theory shows that people often recreate familiar dynamics from childhood, even when those dynamics were painful. What about it feels familiar? What need does it meet? What does chasing someone who's pulling away allow you to avoid about yourself? If you keep ending up in friendships where you're giving way more than you're receiving, you have to examine why you're comfortable in that dynamic. What does over-functioning allow you to feel? What are you afraid would happen if you let others carry their own weight? If you keep taking jobs that exploit your work ethic and undervalue your contributions, you have to look at why you keep accepting situations where you're undervalued. What belief about your worth is driving that choice? This is deep work. This is the work that ensures you don't just walk away from one bad situation only to walk right into another one. This is the work that transforms your entire relationship with what you accept and what you pursue. And it requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and start seeing yourself as someone with agency, with choice, with the power to select differently. The woman who rarely has to walk away has done this work. She knows her patterns. She understands her vulnerabilities, and she actively chooses people and situations that don't exploit those vulnerabilities. Build a life so good that settling becomes impossible. This is the ultimate protection against having to walk away. Creating a life that's so fulfilling, so aligned, so genuinely satisfying that anything that threatens to diminish it becomes immediately obvious and intolerable. When your friendships are deep and reciprocal, you notice immediately when someone new is taking more than they're giving. When your career is challenging and rewarding, you recognize when a job opportunity would actually be a step backward. When your relationship with yourself is solid and peaceful, you spot someone who creates drama from a mile away You're not settling because you don't have to. You're not tolerating mediocrity because you know what excellence feels like. You're not staying in situations that diminish you because you've built a life that expands you. This life doesn't happen by accident. Research on well-being from psychologist Martin Seligman shows that flourishing requires active cultivation of 5 elements: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. It happens because you've been intentional about every area, because you've invested in your own growth, because you've cultivated skills, relationships, experiences, and routines that genuinely nourish you. It happens because you've stopped waiting for external circumstances to make you happy, and you've taken full responsibility for creating happiness yourself. And from that place of genuine fulfillment, your standards aren't theoretical concepts. They're lived realities. You're not hoping for better treatment because you can intellectually argue you deserve it. You're requiring better treatment because you know exactly what you already have, and anything new needs to add to it, not subtract from it. Teach others through action, not words. You've probably heard the phrase, "You teach people how to treat you." But let me tell you what that actually means in practice. It doesn't mean you're responsible for other people's behavior. It means that what you tolerate, you normalize. What you accept becomes the standard. What you allow to continue is what you're communicating is acceptable. The woman who rarely has to walk away teaches people how to treat her through her immediate responses to how she's treated. Not through lectures or ultimatums or passive-aggressive hints, through action. When someone is late without notice, she doesn't accept the excuse and move on. She addresses it. I value my time. If you're going to be late, I need advance notice. Otherwise, I won't wait. When someone speaks to her disrespectfully, she doesn't absorb it and process it later. She names it in the moment. I don't accept being spoken to that way. If you're upset, we can discuss it respectfully, or we can table this conversation. When someone makes a commitment and doesn't follow through, she doesn't give them multiple chances to prove they're unreliable. She adjusts her expectations accordingly and stops depending on them for things that require reliability. She teaches through immediate, consistent, non-negotiable responses that communicate, "This is who I am, this is what I accept, and if you can't operate within these parameters, we can't continue this relationship in its current form." Research on operant conditioning shows that immediate consequences are far more effective at shaping behavior than delayed ones. Don't wait to enforce your boundaries. Do it in the moment. Most people never have to walk away from her because they learn very quickly how to be in relationship with her in ways that work for both parties. The ones who can't or won't learn filter themselves out early before there's pain involved in the separation. Become unmoved. The final transformation is this: you become someone who is fundamentally unmoved by other people's reactions to your boundaries. They're disappointed? Okay. They're angry? That's their right. They think you're being too much, too demanding, too difficult. They're welcome to that opinion. None of it changes what you know to be true about what you need and deserve. None of it convinces you to lower your standards or compromise your peace. None of it makes you question whether you're asking for too much. This is not callousness. This is clarity. This is the difference between caring what people think and being controlled by what people think. Psychologist David Byrne's research on cognitive therapy shows that approval addiction is one of the most common sources of anxiety and depression. Breaking free from needing others' approval is essential for mental health. You can have compassion for someone's disappointment without changing your boundary to alleviate that disappointment. You can acknowledge someone's anger without accepting blame for having needs that didn't align with their expectations. You can understand that your standards might eliminate you from certain people's lives without lowering those standards to maintain access. The woman who rarely has to walk away is unmoved because she's done the deep internal work of knowing that her worth is not up for debate. She's not looking for consensus on whether her boundaries are reasonable. She's not seeking validation that she deserves basic respect. She knows these things bone deep, and that knowing makes her unshakable. The ultimate power. And here's where we arrive at the paradox that makes this entire journey worth it. The moment you become truly capable of walking away from anything, you create the conditions where you rarely have to. When people know you will leave, they treat you differently. When you know you'll survive leaving, you stop tolerating what you shouldn't. When walking away is a genuine option, you're always ready to exercise. You stop getting trapped in situations where it becomes necessary. The power of walking away isn't actually in the leaving. It's in the knowing that you can. It's in the unwavering certainty that you will be okay, that you'll survive, that you'll even thrive without whatever you walk away from. That certainty changes how you move through the world. It changes who approaches you and how they approach you. It changes what you accept and what you immediately correct. It changes everything. Research from Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck on growth mindset shows that believing in your ability to handle challenges actually makes you better at handling them. Your belief in your capacity to walk away makes you less likely to need to. You were never supposed to learn how to walk away so you could spend your life leaving things. You were supposed to learn how to walk away so you could build a life where you rarely need to. So you could become someone whose presence is so valuable, whose boundaries are so clear, whose standards are so high that the wrong people and situations filter themselves out before you're ever deeply invested. That's the real power. That's the real freedom. That's the life that's waiting for you on the other side of every boundary you set and every door you have the courage to close. You're becoming her right now, the woman who knows when to stay and when to go, the woman who trusts herself completely, the woman who built a life so aligned with her truth that protecting it becomes effortless. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of the chapter where you finally become the author instead of just a character in someone else's narrative. Walk away from what doesn't serve you. Walk toward what does, and watch how your entire world transforms when you refuse to settle for anything less than you deserve. You have everything you need. You always did. Now go build the life that proves it.